I need help, boss.
Stands up and says it louder. He goes, I have a really big penis.
We're the NSAA. We're never serious about anything except grip ball.
I have drifted an aircraft carrier.
What?
To an extent, but you'll be out there alone as fuck. There's no...
Just bumping into people by osmosis of dopeness, you know?
3, 2, 1. We're rolling.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Happy Hoodlums podcast. It's your host, Kemper Woodruff. Got my co-host, Zack Sampson, eating right on time. And a very special guest this evening, my big bro, Mr. Bryan Mumford. He is here representing PDX Arsenal, and he has taught many, many people all different kinds of things about firearms. He gave me my first pistol handgun training official. And, if you've never stared into the eyes of an American Eagle, just prepare yourself because you're about to. All right. This is the blue-eyed bandit himself, Mr. Bryan Mumford, everybody.
Hey, what's up, guys? Thank you for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, welcome. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in Oregon that's really, really strange. And so I'm just going to start there and kind of jump into it because I'm so grateful that you're willing to be on this platform and that you're willing to stand up because right now there's a lot of things being spread in the media and really kind of polarizing people and not getting to the point while these crazy backdoor agendas are actually being pushed, you know? And the way they're tugging on people's heartstrings with different aspects, whether it's talking about, these school shootings that happen, or if it's like vets committing suicide, things that are really at home, near and dear to everybody's heart problems, and they're just doing it in vain to really divide people. And, there's things like this ballot that's coming on. It's called Measure 114. And I'd like you to just talk a little bit about it and how it's going to affect the firearms community and what we can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thank you guys for having me on. I think you nailed it on the head. We've seen a mass polarization going on in this country, really fueled by the media for, I'd say, the last 10, 15 years. And so it's really transcended every subject, whether that be politics, whether that be race, whether that be, constitutional rights, so on and so forth. And so first, I think one of the things I'd like to dispel is a common misconception that people have when they run into me that, hey, you're a white male gun owner in Portland, Oregon. You must, be a Trump lover and all that stuff. And, I get that label slapped on me right out of the gate. And one of the main things that I think have caused PDX Arsenal to be as successful as it has is the fact that we leave all of that stuff out of class. Everybody's got their personal opinions, but especially since 2020, you've seen every different race, gender, sexual orientation, political affiliation kind of transcend that and realize that they want to feel safe, which is something that most people don't feel here around the Portland metro area anymore, which has been sad to see, but it's been also really cool on the other end to have, all these different demographics of people come and take the class, and we can all band together for even a 4.5 hour period under the common goal about just learning gun safety. So I love what I do. I always tell people, for me, it's the best job I could ever have because I love people, I love guns, and it allows me to kind of touch on both of those subjects. In regards to Measure 114, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So first, what I would like to do is kind of talk about the overview of what Measure 114 is, and then we'll kind of dive into what's on the table for next year that's already been drafted. Measure 114 is multi-part, and I'd like to kick that off kind of by saying that this was drafted by Every Town for Gun Safety, which is a grassroots organization funded by Michael Bloomberg that's actually nationwide, but they partnered with a local pastor named Mark Knutson in Portland that kind of spearheaded this initiative. And so for this year, what they're trying to pass is a new license required to buy guns. And what they're trying to put it under the guise of is a background check. But unfortunately, we have background checks. They're extensive. We've cut out every kind of, loophole in quotes that have been here in the past, whether that be peer-to-peer transfers, whether that be, what's been dubbed the gun show loophole, where people could buy guns from gun shows with no background check. And I'm all for that, which is something else that a lot of people wouldn't expect out of me. But, I think everybody, whether you're left, right, up, or down, is equally as disgusted by these tragedies that happen nationwide with guns. And, I truly believe that there is common sense gun legislation, things like background checks. And I have this conversation openly with people that, hey, if you domestically abuse your family or your partner, like, I agree, you probably shouldn't be able to own a gun. I believe you should have to go past a standard federal background check when you do a transfer for a gun or buy a gun, just to make sure.
I just want to throw in there that a lot of people don't know Oregon actually has an extra step in the background check process because it goes through the Oregon State Police Firearms Unit, and I didn't really learn this until I worked in a gun store myself, which is actually how we met. And so in terms of peer-to-peer stuff and the way that people in the media want to paint navigating this, we understand we're not buying a crayon, right? You're not just going to the store and buying a hammer. Okay, there's actually something that this tool can be used for that can be utterly destructive with crazy efficiency,
Absolutely.
And so we have to look at that. Just like we all have to take responsibility for the choices that we make. And I've found that most people that come into the gun store, with the exception of there's some people who have like a concealed carry license, and the computer system will, if you type it wrong, or some people, they just get stuck in the queue still, rather than getting pushed to the front of the line, which usually is what that concealed carry license will give you precedence to do. But they're not usually tripping about coming back in a week, 2 weeks to get a gun. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of what you're seeing, is that this is just one more delay in the process for a law-abiding citizen to go buy a gun. You already go fill out a federal background check, which is called a Form 4473. If you don't have a concealed license, like you said, especially in the last couple of years where the masses have gone out to buy guns, many of which for the first time, you've seen this background check queue get up into the 5,000-6,000 range, which causes a delay of several weeks to go pick up a gun. And so what Measure 114 is attempting to do is create a separate class that requires fingerprints, a photo, hands-on competency of handling, loading, unloading, storage, firing, all these things, which really equate to a cost burden. And so there's so much uncertainty surrounding how this course looks as far as layout, who teaches it, so on and so forth, that right now we're kind of caught in this limbo stage of, what are the ramifications of this really look like? What we do know is it is definitely a gun registry. So the other component to Measure 114, which is a big one, is it brings the 10-round magazine ban to Oregon.
Yeah. And also, one of the things, now I also, in my past, have worked in a dispensary, right? And so I saw with that, people just saying, oh, weed up for legalization, and not actually reading the fine print of it, and passing something that they would then have to go back and amend the rules because they were kind of ridiculous, right? And there were just not logistics in place for that. And although these are two very different industries that are definitely at odds with each other because of the background checks and what they say, being it's a federal background check process, I see this falling under that same kind of category of people getting so charged up in one direction or another and being ushered and pushed to vote because of media and social influence without ever reading the fine print. And we're finally realizing this is not a country that can be built off of just a bumper sticker mentality of I support this and this is what I'm doing about it, and then trusting other people to handle it. Because right now, we don't have any logistics on how any of this stuff would happen, and would it essentially turn us into a shall or a can issue state versus a shall issue state?
No. So as far as I know, that's not on the table. We would remain a shall issue. And just for viewers, I'd like to kind of clarify on the difference between what a may issue state versus a shall issue state is, because I know many people don't know about that.
Yeah.
So in this country, there's two types of states that issue permits. There are may issue and there are shall issue, and they are vastly different from each other. So states like California and other states that are pretty vehemently anti-gun typically fall under the may issue clause, where you could jump through all of the loopholes to get your application onto the sheriff's desk. And those loopholes can look different from state to state. But ultimately, it boils down to the sheriff's discretion on whether or not they want to issue the permit. Whereas in a shall issue state, which we are here in Oregon, we are in Utah, the two states that I teach, it means that if you come take the class, you pass the requirements, including the background check with your local police department, these sheriffs of each individual county are obligated to sign off on your permit.
That's awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. Also,
Yeah, I was gonna ask because I didn't.
Yeah,
know what that meant.
yeah, it's a common question that we get in our class, and it may not seem big at the surface, but when you travel, take California for instance, their requirements to apply for your concealed license: mandatory 24 hours worth of classroom training, a separate $350 per person application fee. You have to go to the range, qualify with one specific type of handgun, which would be the only gun you could conceal. And you do all of that just to get your application, again, onto the sheriff's desk. And then most of the time you're denied. So with this recent Supreme Court re-ruling on good cause, which happened over in New York, we expect the good cause part of things to go away, but it's still going to remain extremely difficult. So I'm under the mentality that, hey, yeah, there's common sense gun legislation. Let's do background checks. Let's make sure proven violent people don't get them. And, I'm all on board with that. But if you pass the legal muster and you go through the process the right way, I wholeheartedly believe that, yeah, that's something you should be able to own. So you look at some of these states like Chicago and Atlanta and Detroit and these big major urban cities that have some of the strictest gun laws on the books in the country, yet you see, gun violence and crime rates overall soaring. So unfortunately, when I see this stuff like Measure 114, I've watched it in recent weeks be debated as, oh, people should feel safe at grocery stores, kids should feel safe at schools. And none of the laws that they're trying to put and implement onto the books would do anything to prevent that. And that's most people's main problem with it. There's not one change that would stiffen penalties for people that commit crimes with guns. There's no addressing the few places in our background check process that do seem to be a little bit broken. For instance, if a customer goes into a gun store or a federal firearms license holder to buy a gun and their background check is put on delay, technically the gun store can release that gun after 72 hours. However, the vast majority of gun stores are not going to do that due to the civil liability that comes along with that.
Yeah, no self-respecting gun store would do that, to be honest. The only category that I have seen where it's ever even been like a kind of thing, I've seen people as of recently, when I was working there like a month and a half ago or so, that have been buying guns for 20, 30 years. These are gentlemen in their like 70s and 80s, just looking to add another something to their collection, right? And go out and blast some stuff with their grandsons at the range, And these guys are getting flagged for delays and stuff. And right now there's such a huge backup in delays that it's like, it's really heartbreaking, although we've all ruled against it, you know, and we never even wound up releasing anything like that, because who's going to come and get it? And we are liable for anything that you do. And the fact of the matter is, you still haven't passed for one reason or another. We may
And
know
that's,
you,
yeah,
but
that's the major thing that we see the issue with is currently, you know, whether that be with gun background checks for concealed handgun licensing, even the major counties, Multnomah, Clackamas, Washington, you know, they've worked down their time frame to issue from 11 months due to COVID related reasons down to back around a month or two. But you see these smaller counties like Grant and Yamhill and Joseph, and a lot of these counties are in Oregon. They're still 4 to 5 months out for issuing concealed licenses for new applicants. So to add one more additional layer for people to have to go through to get a gun, you know, one seems very unconstitutional to me, but two, again, it just doesn't do anything to address these underlying issues, which I think everybody collectively want to stop, which is gun violence.
And you said one word earlier when you were talking that was discretion. And I don't want to get away from that, because working at a gun store, it's not like anyone that works there is different from you. We all want to be safe, and not everyone's going to be willing to carry a gun, and that's their choice, right? But in just being a good-hearted person and a smart person, anyone with any kind of savvy will assess who they're actually selling to, right? And so I'll give you an example. There was a gentleman who had come into the gun store, right? He had driven up from California, went to the Oregon DMV, his DMV license, and I think like they printed him the temporary one. So it was like that same day. And then he wanted to come in and just rush to buy a gun, right? And this was someone that, as I was kind of walking him through this process, he wasn't tracking. You know, the dude was not thinking right, you know? And it was just a really fishy situation. And I was like, I think you need to go and rethink this. You know, I don't think that we can do this, you know? And that was something where, although maybe he could have, and actually I think he came back the next day, and this gentleman wound up being someone who had been in a psychiatric ward or something. He was put into a psychiatric ward, which really tracked in line with his behavior of who's soup. And he said for one reason or another, he was sleep deprived, whatever it may be. You know, I'm not cast stones, but it did stand out to me. And I was like, oh, okay, good thing I trusted my spidey senses on that, right? And as it turns out, once he did the paperwork, he was caught up within the actual running the background checks and stuff. So it just showed me a great example of the system really working well.
And good on you for remaining vigilant to those kinds of things. You know, you can see these key indicators from somebody feeling, you know, making you feel rushed. They're throwing out these red flags, whether it be their reasoning behind wanting to buy a gun or, you know, asking questions that allude to doing something illegal with that gun that you really do have to stay mindful of. And in my 11 years teaching my classes, you know, there's only been one or two instances. One in particular I remember very clearly where, you know, a student made a comment at class and really took the class by surprise. A few people scooted back in their chairs and a lady, you know, said, puts her hand over her mouth. And so, you know, I'll kind of touch on that story real quick. I was up in Portland by the Portland airport at one of my old venues that I used to teach at. And it's a big oval table with around 14, 15 people sitting around it. And, you know, every once in a while, I call on a student in class and kind of put them on the spot just because it helps get me an honest answer. And I'll ask somebody, hey, why do you want your concealed license? And so, I like to pride myself on being having the ability to have a fairly good read on people when I meet them. And so, through the first half of this class, I just got kind of a shady vibe from one of my students. And, right before the halfway break, I asked him and I go, "Hey, why do you want your concealed license, dude?" Excuse me. And he kind of looks around the room and then slumps down in his chair. And under his breath, he goes, "So people quit fucking with me." And everybody like scoots back. And I'm like kind of blinking my eyes real big, looking at him with that blank stare. And I'm like, "Do you mind repeating yourself?" And I kind of say it with that tone, like, "Dude, I hope that wasn't serious. And two, I hope you give me a different answer." And he proceeds to repeat himself louder. And it was at that point that I'm like, "All right, cool, let's go ahead and take the halfway break, guys." And, I pulled him to the back and I was kind about it. There's no need to, chastise him over it. But I just told him, "Hey, I don't feel comfortable having my name on your certificate." And even though there's no vicarious liability for that on my end, it just comes down to a moral thing that, hey, I want to play my part. And what I'm passionate about is getting people educated, making them safe and responsible. I understand, I'm the first to understand that guns are not for everybody, but our company mission is that if you're going to own one, be legal about it, be responsible about it, be safe about it.
For sure. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry, I got a family thing real quick. I just want to make sure everything's all good.
Yeah, no problem.
What's up, Cole?
So I actually have a question for you.
Yeah.
Now, I guess it's maybe not necessarily a question, but more so it's something to get your perspective on.
Sure.
So when you talk about guns and gun restrictions and things like that, obviously death is always something that's going to come up in that. And something I seen on the news today was a mass stabbing in Vegas. And that something that came to mind when I seen that was, regardless of gun laws, bad people are going to do bad things. And so we can restrict guns, but those bad people are still going to find a way to do something. And so I kind of wanted to see like your perspective on that, as well as like with everything going on.
Yeah, and I mean that's just the reality of the situation. Is ultimately what people want to ban is violence. They want to ban human to human violence, where innocent people get injured and killed. So you see other countries, take Britain for example, that there are no guns allowed for citizens. So their main weapon of choice is going to be knives. And I hadn't heard about the situation that you're referring to, but I know that's more common than not to be the tool of choice to accomplish the same goal, injury or murder, over in other countries that don't have access to guns. And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't have to be a knife, it doesn't have to be a gun. You see it done with vehicles driving through parades. You see it back in the Oklahoma City bombing with fertilizer and a pressure cooker. So ultimately what people want to ban is evil. And the thing that really frustrates me the most is that the core issues that we face as a society, they're the hardest to address, so we don't address them. We want to blame the tool, we want to blame the situation, we want to blame everything but mental health, instability. We don't really address bullying or the lack of proper parenting at home anymore. A lot of these root issues that culminate into creating people that go out there to do these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So
and I think that was a phenomenal answer, Brian.
Yeah, it was
Just
fantastic.
so you know, that was great. I want to apologize for just stepping away real quick. But one thing that I was listening to on another podcast actually was a gentleman named Tim Larkin, and he wrote a book called "When Violence Is the Answer," right? And I started to look at this, and it was such a provocative title because it's something I felt my whole life. Like when I was younger, I got in a lot of trouble, and I was somewhere between a class clown, and so in learning who I had a edge. I teetered on the edge of a bully, but I always fought bullies. That was my thing. Like I didn't like seeing people get picked on, and uh, I would get in trouble all the time for fighting people who were doing the wrong thing, you know? And I think what we're seeing now when you step out of the classroom of elementary age, right? And you get into adulthood and you're still looking at people that are oftentimes hurt children. And I think the classroom is a phenomenal place to start with this for a metaphor for society, because when I was looking at this, I was like, huh, in a school year, there was maybe, if it was a crazy year, like 8 or 9 fights, right? And typically, it was the same kids causing these fights in multiple fights, right? And so I was like, why would you discipline the whole class with more rules to try and stop somebody who doesn't give a shit about the rules, right? And I was like, oh, so when we look at these situations, like, and Zach brought up a good point. I was watching a Colion Noir video that was talking about mass stabbings and things in other countries, shootings with hunting rifles, you know, in other countries where they don't have access to like an AR or something, right? And they're still just having a field day because it's a person with a weapon with a crazy mind and intent to do harm, right? And he's surrounded vastly by peaceful people and people that aren't armed and people that aren't empowering themselves, right? And so I don't know. I think it's kind of an interesting thing when I look at what's going on in America and the state that we're in, because these are outlier events. As terrible as they are, they're outliers. And say with like AR-15s, a lot of people are scared of them, but they take up like maybe like 2 to 3%, if that, of all the fatalities from guns, which is a padded statistic, anyways.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You know, there's many tools that the media uses to further the narrative. You know, everybody wants to kind of demonize the AR-15, which is the most popular sporting rifle in America for a reason. You know, like you said, it's used in a very small number of murders. Unfortunately, the murders that they are used in, you know, are very gruesome ones that make national headlines, as it should for the event of that caliber. But there's other things that, you know, go to further this narrative that we can't, you know, we're not responsible enough to own guns. But what I've seen specifically here in the Portland metro area are, you know, they have tools to further this narrative. And what I mean by that is around a year and a half, 2 years ago, with all of the, you know, economic uncertainty, COVID uncertainty, we had a mass movement here in the Portland metro area to defund the police. And one of the main sectors of that police force that was successfully defunded was the Gun Violence Reduction Task Force. And so when you critically think on this as it happened, you know, I kind of called it. I go, what do you think gun violence is going to do? And if people took a few moments and stopped and asked themselves that question, you know, if you have common sense, it's going to dictate, hey, gun violence is going to go through the roof. Yeah. And last year in particular, we had, you know, gun violence went up 1,800% in the Portland metro area, where these other major cities, Detroit, Chicago, Atlanta, they go up around 70 to 90%. We were up 1,800%. And, you know, then that's used to say, okay, well, look at what gun violence is doing. You guys shouldn't have them. And they use that to legitimize the fact that they're right and we're wrong. And you see this kind of legislation like Measure 114 being put through on a ballot to vote. And so, you know, we have to really read between the lines these days on what's the narrative here. You know, what do statistics show? What do facts show? And make an educated and, you know, an informed choice based off of that. And I think that's such a lost skill these days is critical thinking, because, and I see this on both sides, the left, the right, you know, whatever you want to call it, whether that be you watch CNN too much, you watch Fox too much. I see people just intake all of this information and then they regurgitate it as facts without checking it, without validating it. And, you know, it gets old that people really have lost that skill. A lot of people have lost that skill of being able to step back, hear both sides of an argument, hear them articulated from somebody that, you know, clearly understands their side, and then make your own decision based off of your moral value, your beliefs, the facts as they lay on the table. And I'd really like to see people start getting back to that.
For sure. And, you know, an interesting thing talking about kind of stepping back and detaching enough to think logically, right? There's two things I want to say. One thing that really was interesting to me, and I was watching a video of a gentleman who is a Delta guy, and he was saying de escalation is not for the other party as much as it is for you when you're empowered, so you can be calm and rational in your decision making, because you know that in this situation, when you're dealing with someone who is irrational and unconsolable, you know, i'm I'm the one who doesn't have intent to harm here. I know I'm not going to harm this person unless I absolutely have to, right? But I need to have good decision making skills within that realm, you know, and this goes back to that understanding levels and rules of engagement, right? Both legally and just ethically and morally, right? And having that barometer within yourself built in. And for a lot of people who have never been engaged in a violent situation, to expect that of themselves with no training whatsoever, and take, you know, with them not taking it upon themselves to make themselves an asset in a room for no other reason than if someone does come into this room and want to inflict harm on other people, now me having no training in this, I'm somewhat of a liability for someone who may be in the position to do so. And these are aspects of concealed carry and everyday stuff that a lot of people aren't weighing out of fear, and what we do in looking at things symbolically, right? So I think one thing that we have to do as a society is kind of deconstruct what we see a gun as, right? It isn't something that's necessarily just easy to pick up and become absolutely proficient at. You know, it takes training to get that to translate. And then you add all the layers of life in a real situation where you're not shooting at paper and you expect to be good just because you pick it up. You're not Rambo, bro. Life doesn't work like
And
that.
I definitely want to touch on a couple things there. You know, you sat through my concealed license, Kemper, my class, and you've heard me reiterate several times in that one class, which I tell every class, that the best gunfight that any of you ever go out and get into is the one that you don't. And I could not mean that with more sincerity. Like you said, both on a moral level and a legal aftermath process, I can guarantee you that you don't want to go through. And especially in a city like Portland that is more, you know, controlled by one side that doesn't like guns, we'll call it. The odds are stacked against you, having to articulate inside of a courtroom why you did what you did. So, you know, God forbid that it does come down to that situation you find yourself in where that is the only mitigating factor of you living or dying, is having a gun and defending yourself. You know, we really try to draw out and, you know, tell people what the aftermath of that really looks like. You know, most people, I won't say most people, I see many people go out and buy a gun, and with that gun comes that feeling of power, of having the means to defend themselves. But what most people don't really understand is, one, what that aftermath process looks like, and two, like you alluded to, if you own a gun and you don't have any training behind it, you are more of a liability with it than an asset. So at PDX Arsenal, we offer all of our students that do their concealed class through us a 30% off discount on their first 3 shooting classes that we do on a private one-on-one basis. And on our shooting classes, we're not making a lot of money off that. That covers fuel, it covers targets, it covers, you know, a very small salary for instructors. But we do that because that is where confidence is born, is out on the range with a gun between your hands. There's no amount of classroom training that is ever going to make up for that. And Oregon, our concealed license process does not require a live fire component, yet we see the importance of, that part of things plays. So that's why we offer our students that discount. And I can tell you, even in 1-2 hour class that we do on a private basis, so we can really individualize and custom tailor the instruction around that student, we see huge improvements. My favorite part of my job is going out there and finding unique ways to translate that information to individuals in their own right, to where there's that light bulb moment and they go, oh, that's why we do it that way. And all of a sudden they can translate instruction into application. They start shooting accurately. And there's times that I've had students that, come out to the range, they could not hit the cardboard to save their life. And by the end of 1-2 hour lesson, they're punching one hole through the target. And to see that level of confidence and self-security kind of wash over them, that really just changes my day. I love what I do. I can't say that enough.
And I have to say, how you do what you do and just who you are, what you bring, not only in your integrity, but what PDX Arsenal as a whole, like, I've learned so much from you, and I've referred so many people to you, because what a lot of people in Portland do not want to accept is the reality of this is a lot of people are so scared and they're very naive about firearms. And so working in a gun store, I've had to go above and beyond teaching and advising people. And I will admit, I was 100% green when I first got there about a year ago. And in the time that I was there, I can't tell you, I've over 10, 15 actual teachers, right? Either still working or retired, spent their whole career doing that. Little old ladies, skinny dudes, all different kinds of stuff. The high school football coaches. I've seen them come in to buy guns, and a lot of them be like, hey, I'm just going to keep this on me and just keep it in my purse. And I go, well, do you have a concealed handguns license? And they go, no. And I'm like, well, then you should definitely not do that. And you should definitely go and get training. And it's a perfect opportunity, rather than to condemn somebody, to edify them, and encourage them to empower themselves for the right reasons and go through the right channels and be an advocate for the safety of not only that person, but society as a whole. In this tribe we call humanity. And I think one of the things that we're moving away from, and when we sensationalize violence and the way that the media has gone about it, is we so condemn the tools or these acts without seeing them as a choice. And the truth is, everything is scarier before you're willing to look at it and accept that it exists, right? And this is a very yogic thing. And to go back to my little yogi thing I wanted to say earlier real quick about being able to detach. I was asking a friend of mine, I said, hey man, life is like a pendulum, right? And he goes, yeah, but how do you stop it? And I was like, what? And he was like, well, the best place to stop it's in the middle, right? But you can't do that if you're acting in this physical world. And I was like, so if we're only looking at these physical acts and stuff, and we're so emotionally driven, and we have this emotional need to react rather than think, and become proactive and make clear-headed decisions, we're not going to have the same concise or accurate judgment on reading situations and people. And I think we need to look at one another and go, look, rather than condemning each other, how can we do this better? Because back in the day, there used to be gun racks in kids' trucks and stuff, and kids knew where the guns were, and we didn't have these problems. So the guns didn't change. The fact is the people changed.
Yo, you're absolutely right. I mean, I consider myself more of a libertarian these days than anything else. I want my gay neighbors to be able to get married, own a machine gun, and smoke whatever drugs they want to smoke, So the fact that you, like you said, you used to be able to have a shotgun rack in the back of your truck, you didn't see these kinds of mass shootings or school shootings going on, particularly at the rate that you have seen them in the last 15 years, which directly points the arrow to this is a societal problem. I think it's very ironic and interesting that it directly runs parallel with about the same length of time that social media has been around. And, I haven't been able to draw solid conclusions other than the fact that, I think that social media and the fact that everybody is connected all the time plays a major part in how our, human psyche has changed. I really don't believe that everybody should know every bad thing going on around the world instantly. I don't believe that we were developed to be able to handle that. I always gave my mom crap back in high school. I would be leaving for school and she'd have the news on first thing in the morning. And I said, why do you watch this first thing in the morning? And it's putting in, starting your day instead of in prayer or meditation or, positive thoughts and, things that we could be doing to better our minds. But instead we're filling it with what shooting happened last night, what major event, whether that be a natural disaster or otherwise, happened on the other side of the world that killed X amount of people. I personally don't choose to live my life that way. I don't watch the news. If something's important enough, it's going to make its way to me and I'll find out about it. But I try hard not to actively go out and seek these things that are going on in the world that, really many of which I have zero control over.
And I really want to take a moment to get into not only the way that thoughts and emotions correlate, with what we manifest, because the law of attraction changed my life, but also having faith, what we hang our hats on and where we fit into our place in this community of life, as a whole. I don't care how you believe, but you got to have faith in something. And really, it's going to stem from being able to find that resonance within yourself. And so that's why I say it's less about religion than God, right? Your religion may matter to you and be a gateway, or you not having a religion may be your gateway to discovering God and the divinity of your spirit and empowering yourself, right? Although I'm a Christian, that has nothing to do with what you are, right? Unless you believe that same way. But really what I'm trying to say is we have to look at the fact that when you give your thought to anything, you're praising it. Because you can't look at anything without emotionally becoming it or beginning to resonate with it, unless you're very rooted in your influence, and your understanding of self. And in terms of how social media fits into this and the news as a whole, when we're looking at these things, we're creating this emotional state that's going to resonate with thoughts that are fearful. And, if you're not putting on any kind of armor of intelligence and integrity morally, so you're sound within yourself and you're comfortable within yourself, the way that you're going to handle anyone else is going to be tainted, more or less. Doesn't mean you're a bad person, but good can always get better, right? And we have this society where I describe it as like comparative excellence, right? But fuck that. You are where you are and you got to work with whatever you have. And you said something in your class that stood out to me. And you said your training stops when you have to use it. You only have as much as you have up to that point where you're met with that situation. And in society today, we're not looking at that. And we're not looking at one another and going, hey, you're acting wrong preemptively, and rather than condemning them, taking the necessary steps for corrective measure to be taken. I've seen a lot of people, and I do want to touch on this, people who have gone to prison before. Everyone's probably got someone in their family that has or knows somebody, but not everyone that has committed a crime, even if it may be a violent one, is that way for life. Especially when you're put into a system where in prison, like respect is all you have. Like that's like at the top of the peak, and then you're released back into a society where people think they can talk however they want, and then we expect you to react a certain way, right? And I've seen so many people actually come out and want to make that change. There's some people that are career criminals, but I'm just saying and this is where it gets hard, where there's a gray area of I'm not God, and I don't know who's gonna change or snap 1 minute to the other. I just know my power of influence and my role in this is to help lead you and not condemn you and correct you in a way that's proper, with proper severity for whatever action is either taking place or preemptively before it does, hopefully,
Yeah, and I would definitely say that there's a double-edged sword there. Rehabilitation is proven; it's there. Whether that's done through the criminal justice system is up for debate for the majority of people. Typically, you see people that begin a journey to personal growth, whether that be a spiritual journey or by other means, where that real transformation actually occurs. On the other end, especially on the subject of guns, though, there do need to be ramifications for your actions. We do have legal processes in place for expungement for nonviolent crimes to where, if it was a mistake, let's say you had a misdemeanor marijuana possession charge, which was a big deal 20 years ago, obviously not such a big deal today, it prevents those people from exercising their constitutional right to be able to defend themselves, their family. I do believe that, there should be a case by case and individualized basis where we can go back through, say, hey, this was a nonviolent crime. You've stayed out of trouble for X amount of years, and go through a process to restore those rights. So I'm happy to see that is in place. But and not to say that people that have committed violent offenses in the past are never rehabilitated to the point where they probably would be safe to own a gun or another type of weapon. However, we need to have these type of legal incentives to put in place as a deterrent. If there are no ramifications for our actions, unfortunately, we're seeing that play out right now in the city that we live in here in Portland, Oregon, where we've got a district attorney that, has just a revolving door of our jails and prison systems that allow people to go do these heinous acts of, assault with a deadly weapon, rape, aggravated this or that, and they're back on the street within, 10 hours. So where's the incentive for them not to go out and continue to do the things that they do to people?
Yeah.
So there's two ways to look at it there, and you're absolutely right. I think it is very important that we do take a look at the cases where, people have proven they've changed their lives and give them a reward for that, whether that be through restoring their rights to carry a firearm or to own a firearm or otherwise.
Yeah, and I just want to bring it up because giving a voice to the voiceless is a necessary thing, and not just to the voiceless, but contributing into the conversation aspects that do exist that we can't just gloss over. I understand that this society has almost like a gaping wound in some senses. We have many wounds, but there's some that are more in need of patching than others. And how we go about that is to actually put all these pieces into the conversation so we can logically go and prioritize through it and figure out how to build and to better the infrastructure. Because what I see also is a ton of people who want to work, but they want to work in a way that actually makes a difference. And I think that's something we're seeing in society post-COVID now. And a lot of jobs and things like that are unfulfilling, and a lot of what we're being fed through the media and political means is a deterrent for some people who don't have a vehicle that they've created like you have to get out there and really do something. And I think this is a great moment to kind of get into what drew you into and drove you into making PDX Arsenal and the career path that you have, because you're such a special, special soul, man. And you've really changed my whole life just in showing me the power of checking in, you know, just checking in and just saying, hey, man, how's it going? Hey, I'm thinking about you. Or, hey, you don't normally talk that way. What's going on? Is something bothering you? Just being that kind of individual.
And that's the best. There's a couple things there. So the best way that I know how to cause change in this world is to be that change, to lead by example. And I've always been a believer that if you want something in the world, show other people that you're doing it yourself. And so, I really try to emphasize that to everybody I meet. I was taught at a very young age from my dad that people may forget your name, they may forget your face, but they're never going to forget how you made them feel. And being nice to somebody, extending out a hand, especially in a time of need, it's free. It costs nothing and can ultimately save a life, which I've seen happen. So I just wanted to say that to lead off, getting into the background. My background was starting my company. And I really hope that, that's a takeaway that people get from this interview. Seeing who I am as a person. It's just, if you want something in this world, lead by example, and you stand a much better chance to see other people around you take that example and run with it as well.
Can I just touch on something real quick too before you get into that?
Yeah.
To give you a perfect example, because in trying to be that change, and one of the things that I strive to do is just be vulnerable and allow people's stories to come to light. And Happy Hoodlums as a whole, this whole wonderful entertainment movement came about, and this podcast in particular, to promote people that may go unnoticed and to give them their shine the way that they deserve it. And the kind of man that you are, this is a great story, because I love your dad, your brother, your family. You're amazing people. I shared on here right before Father's Day an episode, Father's Day tribute and gift and memorial to my dad, because he passed away. And this year, I felt so bad, and I didn't have anything to really do on Father's Day that was gonna uplift my spirits, and I was looking to give, and you went out of your way and you let me come and shoot with your brothers and your dad, and you just said, hey man, come on, let's go out on the range. And I don't know why I pluraled brothers, but your brother and your dad, and you guys took me out there, and the way that you guys treated me as family was just so endearing, and it really changed my life and how I see what I can do. How far am I willing to go? I had to reflect on that and go, wow, this man really extended love from the bottom of my heart and embraced me as a brother, in a time when I really needed it. And so to anyone that ever is curious about where to go to train, you're someone that's really from the bottom of the heart with it. I know I could call you at 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. and you'll answer. So my hat is 100% off to you and on to you at the same time, bro. This hat is so meaningful to me, bro. I wear this on any of my bad days, And
thank you for saying that. And you are the type of person, you came out that day and immediately made such an impression on my brother, on my dad, and continue to make an impression on me. I want to tell you, you're always welcome. I love that our friendship has, transcended almost into more of a family type relationship where, again, I feel I could call you at any time of night, that way about me. Zach, I'd love to have you out on the range. You're welcome anytime. Also, I'd love to meet you here soon.
For real.
But, I tried to carry that mentality of people before profit into business. So to kind of start at my humble beginnings, I've worked from pizza shops to metal factories to construction jobs, when I was 16 through about 18. So I bounced around from job to job, not really staying anywhere too long. And I always had a background in music. So many people don't know this about me, but I went to college for audio engineering, got my degree in that, did a 1.5 2 year internship at a recording studio, and finally landed a full-time job as an engineer up in Vancouver, Washington, which I kept for all of about 2 weeks before I quit. I've had this weird knack of always asking myself that important question of, do you see yourself being happy doing this 10 years down the line? And when I asked myself that question, the answer I came to was no. And it didn't take me long after that to break away from that, step back and revisit, well, what is it that you love to do? And unfortunately, where I was so confident in my high school years of like, oh, you guys don't know what you want to do, I want to do music, and I ran with that, I found myself at 21 years old back at square one, where most people I went to school with were turning out from college with a path set in front of them that they knew they wanted. And I didn't. So I asked myself I kind of made that important decision to myself, I should say, that I didn't care about money at that point. I wanted to do something that I love doing. And, my dad stressed himself out a lot growing up, working extremely hard to provide myself and my family a great life, comfortably financially, but it took a toll on his mental health. And growing up, there were years that I could count on one hand how many times that I saw him come home happy from work. So I made that conscious decision that, I don't care how much money I make, I want to do something I love. And so when I was 21 years old and kind of back at square one, I asked myself, well, what else do you enjoy doing? And my background has always kind of been in guns in one sense or another, whether that be just shooting with family or competitive shooting, what have you. And so I started PDX Arsenal. And for those who don't know, it was actually started on a napkin in a bar out in Clackamas, drawing up business card ideas and, not really knowing what I wanted to do with it. And so I started the company thinking that it would be kind of some good side money. And, I knew I was going to have to work really hard. And luckily for me, working hard was something that didn't come foreign to me. I had a great upbringing and an example of somebody that almost worked too hard. And a lot of those skills and values were instilled into me from a young age. So while I was building my company, I worked for some other major gun companies. I worked for Crimson Trace, who makes laser grip modules out in Wilsonville. Super cool. I got a job I probably wasn't qualified for, running an assembly department of 74 people at age 24 years old. And worked for Benchmade Knife Company. I've worked for Sig Sauer Electro Optics. And so I worked in the manufacturing environment, whether that be as an assembler myself or running these assembly departments. And those were usually 40 to 50 hour weeks by themselves. And that was my main stable of income. I chose to sacrifice the bulk majority of my nights and weekends throughout my entire 20s, so the better part of a decade, to build my company on my off time, which is what it took. And so people will see what this company has grown into these days. And, you'll see these kind of memes on the internet of what people see and what they don't see as far as owning a business. And people see that I get to love what I do. I, get to play with some cool toys and work with my friends. But what they didn't see were the years and years and years that I sacrificed my time, my money, my energy, investing it into my business and believing in myself. Where along that long, treacherous road, there were plenty of people that came to me and, kind of belittled my dreams, my goals, my company. Oh, your little gun company, this or that. And, I persevered through that because ultimately I saw the bigger picture of what I would be able to accomplish. Now, to be transparent with everybody, I never thought that it would get to this point where not only is it employing me full time and allowing me a comfortable lifestyle, but now I have other people and their families relying on the income that this company can produce for them. And that's something I'm truly honored by. I've afforded a few different combat military veterans the opportunity to have a different kind of transition back into the civilian sector where, they're overseas doing that job, ending lives in defense of our country. And, they signed on the dotted line and they don't have to come home and bag groceries right when they come back from a high conflict zone, a war zone. they can come back and take some of the tools and skills that they were, they learned in the military, and they directly translate to what we do here. So it's been a major honor to have a platform to, one, talk to people and let them know who I am as a person, but two, afford people opportunities as far as my guys go, and women I've had work for me that really allow them to grow and blossom and use their natural talents as leaders.
Mm-hmm. Hey, man. And you have done very well at doing that, because everyone that I've seen, like when I came to your class, you had two other instructors that were there and that were being groomed to learn how to do these presentations in a way that can reach everybody and not miss any of the points that really need to be made, because you go way beyond a PowerPoint, bro. You really address what someone's getting into preemptively, as well as help them with the paperwork process of it. And that is a phenomenal thing, and just that as a resource to Oregonians in general, you are creating a huge impact in the community, and it's beginning to reach other people that, you know, for a long time, people thought about the firearms community as just Uncle Bob with his rifle. And if you weren't in one of those families, it didn't apply to you, you know? And it's totally changed. And it's not that way. And I don't think it's ever truly been that way, you know? Although back in the day, there was probably more of a grooming process, I guess, starting early, right? I know with my family, I shot my first gun probably when I was 5 years old, you know? And so, and we didn't shoot often, to just be fully transparent with you. That's why by the time I got to the point where I actually met you, I was like, wow, dude, this is an awesome industry. I feel like I always kind of stepped in the shit, so to speak, and was in the right place at the right time during industries as they kind of moved and transitioned, and me having my background in the weed business before this, and now here with firearms at a time when, after the pandemic and with all this stuff that's going on politically in not just our country but worldwide, nationwide, around the world, we're starting to see the way people look at guns different. And I was able to see the overlap of demographics, in terms of just people, and who's affected, who's coming in, and be able to then turn around and be a purveyor of knowledge, or at least a voice for the community across the whole spectrum for people. And I think the way that I've seen you interact with everybody, like when I was in your class, you had totally mixed age group, ethnicity, sexes. Everyone was in there. Everyone felt comfortable. It was an atmosphere of respect and of education, across the board. Whether someone was 48 years old and been shooting their whole life, they shut the fuck up so you could listen and learn. And if you kind of felt that someone was itching, or they thought more than they knew more than they did, you tested it, and you say, hey, can you explain to me what plus P ammunition is, or the components of a bullet, things like that are very basic, but it's everything in what you're getting into when you start carrying firearms. Also, I want to give a chance for Zack to ask anything that's on his mind, because I know I can go
I'm
back
just
and forth.
absorbing. I'm just absorbing, dude. You're good.
Okay. And I wrote something down, and I'm just kind of curious what your take on this is. But what are the real talking points for you in terms of living peacefully with a strong offense as your best way to have a solid defense? Because that's kind of what carrying a firearm is at a certain point.
Yeah, I think as corny as I feel like this quote is, I think there's a lot of validity to it, that it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And it's a quote that my friend, who unfortunately passed away about a month ago, used to say to me a lot. And I'd kind of laugh at it in the moment, but I'd sit on that, because it, unfortunately, what I see these days is the whole, toxic masculinity in quotes agenda being pushed to, kind of demasculize men. And God made us a very specific way for a very specific reason. We're protectors. We are, meant to go out and build great things. And I don't say that with the narrative that women can't do those things at all. But I think we were designed very different for very specific reasons. So when it comes to being the protector of the family, you have kids, you have a partner that you hear that bump in the middle of the night. I'm personally built and inclined, as I know many men are, to go address that issue, confront that issue. And so what I'm here to do is help prepare people. I'm never out there pushing the fear agenda that, hey, this is going to happen to you, so you should come take my class. I don't use fear as a tactic to drive sales to the company. What I do is empower people through education and an experience rather than just another class that checks the box, to keep people engaged and really give them the raw, unfiltered information that is going to make them make the difference in their life of being, again, a liability versus an asset. We build assets at PDX Arsenal, and I couldn't be more proud of that. You talked earlier about the fact that my instructors that you saw at the class that day were really kind of learning the overall process, learning the ropes, kind of figuring out their own lane that they want to run with it. And, we all collectively agree as a company that that's the best way we know how to fight for 2A rights, especially in the last 2-3 years with all the craziness going on around the world. I've had students that come in and self-admit to me right out of the gate upon shaking my hand that, hey, I hate guns. I don't want to own guns. I came here to get educated on them. And, I absolutely take my hat off to those types of people. I will sit there and hear their side of the debate all day long. What I can't stand is the people that use the wrong terminologies, use the wrong phrases, really becomes apparent within the first few minutes of talking with them that they don't understand even their own side of the argument. And you hear politicians on the news, 30 caliber ghost clips shoot in half a second. You can just tell by their language that they don't understand what they're talking about. And so I like for my classroom to be an open debate, a healthy open debate around guns as the subject. I like to break the narrative that this is only something for white males and, these patriotic rednecks who run around with, XYZ as t-shirts or flags or what have you, and show that everybody, this is transcending every type of demographic. And that is the best way I know how to fight for 2A rights, is get people to have some skin in the game, get them to have some education behind their opinions. And, their opinion is their opinion. That's the beauty of this country, is we get to differ from each other and can still get along if you choose to. But going back to the polarization that we discussed earlier, is that, unfortunately, what's more common than not these days is if you don't agree with 5 out of 5 things with somebody else, they don't like you. They don't want to be friends with you. And, I grew up in an era, I'm 32 years old, but I still grew up in an era where you were encouraged to have a different, still get along with them. So, I try to play the part the best I can and use the platform that I've built to, one, make everybody feel welcome. But 2, provide this type of information to people that otherwise may not get it. They're left to mainstream media for the information that they do get, which is oftentimes skewed. So I'm very grateful to have the platform that I do. I'm grateful for you guys for using the platform you've built to, have different guests on. I've been a happy Hoodlums fan for a long time, and, I love the guests that you bring on. I love the questions you ask, and yeah, I'm very grateful for the platform you guys have built as well.
Well, thank you, man. I gotta say, Zack is the engine in this car. I'm just waving down people and going, "Hey, you need a ride? Need a ride?" And so, anytime that you ever want to come back on, you are more than welcome. I can't give a better reference to you. I will stand by you until the end on that. And I really just want to say thank you for showing up and being willing to give a voice that is open, honest, um, opinionated, rightfully, and willing to address anything that someone disputes in a way that's peaceful. And um, I just want to say one thing is that, you know, there's a phrase in the Bible that says, "You will know God's people by the way they love." You know, and really that's what it comes down to, is the way that you handle somebody. And I think you're handling things across the board phenomenally because of how you handle people and how you handle yourself. And you're a great man, and thank you for being on here. Is there anything else you want to say before we get out of here? And Zach, if there's any questions that you have before we get out, feel free.
I'm good.
Yeah, definitely just want to touch back on Measure 114 real quick. I encourage people to vote no on this. Whether you're for guns or against guns, this legislation doesn't do anything to, effectively change the horrible things that we're seeing happening. What it does prevent is law-abiding citizens being able to protect themselves. They're doing that through these classes which the police don't have the capacity to teach. They're doing it through absurd amounts of funding that they don't have in place for this, that taxpayers get to pick up the bill for. The Oregon Sheriff's Association has estimated this is going to cost $46 to $51 million a year that the taxpayers will pick that bill up for, to do these classes, this licensing, all of that kind of stuff. And it brings a 10-round magazine ban to Oregon. I'm a competitive shooter. Our competitions are no longer allowed to run. You have a self-defense encounter with multiple attackers and are forced to only be able to carry 10 rounds. I really strongly encourage people to vote no on this and address the real issues that can cause effective change. The other thing I always open up to my students and tell them, whether it's 5 minutes after you leave my class, whether it's 5 years after you leave my class, I'm always an available resource. And I'd like to tell the Happy Hoodlums audience that if you guys ever have a question and want to reach out to me, you can send me an email at Bryan, Bryan, at pdxarsenal.com, or give me a call at my number you can find on my company website, pdxarsenal.com. And I am always happy to help you, whether that's guns, gear, laws, transportation stuff. If I don't have an answer, I'm not going to give you one just to give you one, but I have a pretty good network I've built over the years of people I can lean on for answers I don't know. And collectively, I want us all to win together. So really, again, appreciate you guys having me on, and very grateful for this opportunity.
What are some of the other things that will be coming behind Measure 114? And, fuck it, you can leave it on here. But we just want to know for the viewers, and give you something that you could also post so people know this isn't just the end goal. This is the beginning, and the way that they're going at this, and what a lot of people don't want to accept, is that, like, I've talked to so many police officers that come in to the gun store and they're like, we're not able to get to you on time. That crime's already happened. Like, it's on you to defend yourself. We're so up to our necks and above, we're drowning in water right now. And now they want to create all these different ramifications and hoops to jump through with nobody there to fill that position. And certainly nobody qualified right now.
Yeah, so you made a couple important points there that it's a sobering realization, but the sad reality that nobody is coming to save you. If you have an honest conversation with a police officer, they'll be the first to tell you that the bulk majority of their job is report taking. Their job is not to come save your life. So I encourage people, whether it's through firearm training, whether it's hand-to-hand defense training, whether it's through situational awareness training, which is an equally large element of personal protection, that you go out and you get educated. What we've seen here over the last 10 years are things being implemented, not passed here in the country. So in 2015 here in Oregon, we had Senate Bill 941, which ended the private party transfers of guns. We then passed Oregon red flag laws in 2019 to prevent things like domestic abusers from getting guns. All for it. Last year, we had Senate Bill 554 implemented, not passed, which a lot of people still to today are not aware of, that prevents where people can carry even with a valid concealed license. The Capitol grounds, individual school districts, Portland, Bend, Eugene, Salem, etc. And, your local politicians' homes, they added themselves to that list. And then this year, what we're seeing is, what was called IP-17 and then was rebranded into Measure 114, which is the 10-round magazine ban, the separate license to buy a gun. And next year, it's IP-18, which is a full-on assault weapons ban. 95% of the guns owned here in Oregon, you're not going to be able to own. These are misdemeanor felony charges for possessing the same guns that are legal as of today. And so people do need to wake up that this is something that will continue to happen where, whether it's the side that's against guns or our politicians that continually chip away at our rights that we've had for a long time, until one day we wake up and we don't recognize the country that we live in anymore. And so whether you're for guns, against guns, there's no debate that firearms have been woven into the fabric of this society and this country since the inception of it. And with over 400 million plus guns known in circulation here in this country, Pandora's box has been opened. The cat's out of the bag. There's no putting it back in. So, the best way I know how to address this on a personal basis and with my company is through training and education. But I think we really need to shift this attack on the gun itself and really start attacking the root causes that are much more difficult issues to address. But, again, I understand part of our responsibility as gun owners is to stay educated on all of these new laws as they're passed or implemented. And that can be a daunting task. So again, I just want a final reminder to you guys, to the audience, that I'm always a phone call away. I'm an email away. I'm here to help you guys however I can and share the information that I do have with you guys.
Thank you so much, Bryan.
Thank you.
You rock. That we couldn't have asked for a better closing statement from you. So everybody wake up and we'll catch you next week. We appreciate you. Love you. Peace.
Love you too. Take care, guys.
Later.
Later.